The hall was beautiful. That was the first thing Dihun noticed when he walked in. The ceiling was made of clear material, and through it the stars looked close enough to touch. 7 flags hung on the walls, one for each civilization inside the conquered peace alliance. The human flag was the smallest one. It always was. Orly Station had been built 600 years ago by all 7 species together. No single civilization owned it. No single government controlled it. It floated in neutral space between stars like a promise made in metal and light. Tonight, it held that promise at its finest. Long tables were covered in white cloth. Alien dignitaries stood in small groups, talking quietly. Soft music played from somewhere above. The air smelled clean and recycled, the way station air always did. But someone had filled the hall with small potted plants from 4 different worlds to make it feel less cold. It was the 900th anniversary of the peace accords. Dihun stood near the wall with 2 other soldiers from the honor guard. He was 26 years old and had never fired a weapon outside of a training room. He had been assigned to General Jeon Han's personal guard for this event because his commanding officer said he had a calm face. A calm face, apparently, was important at peace summits. General Han stood at the front of the hall near the speaker's platform. She was not a large woman. She was of medium height, with short black hair that had a few threads of silver in it now. She wore her dress uniform dark blue with gold trim and 30 years of service ribbons on the chest. She looked comfortable in it, the way someone looks comfortable in their own skin. She was 54 years old and had spent most of those years either preventing conflict or walking through the ruins of one. Dihun watched her speak with the Telari ambassador, a tall, thin being with 4 arms and pale blue skin. The ambassador laughed at something she said. She smiled back. She was good at that, making people feel heard, making them feel like whatever they were worried about could be managed, could be talked through, could be solved. Across the hall, the Voakai delegation stood apart from everyone else. There were 6 of them, all in deep red military dress. They did not mingle. They did not smile. Their ambassador, a broad-shouldered male named Daskaren, stood with his hands clasped behind his back and watched the room with the expression of someone who had been forced to attend and was counting the minutes until he could leave. Dihun had been briefed about the Voakai situation. Everyone in the HIDC had. 3 colony systems in the Outer Drift, systems that belonged to the smaller Yenar people, had been quietly absorbed by the Voakai Empire over the past 11 years. It had been done slowly. A military post here. A trade blockade there. Then one day the Yenar just stopped being in charge of their own territory. The Voakai had never officially declared anything. They had simply moved in and waited for the galaxy to accept it. The galaxy, mostly, had looked the other way. General Han had not. Nari Wu stood near the side of the hall with a small recording device. She was a journalist from the Earth Broadcasting Collective, one of only 3 press members allowed inside the summit hall. She was 31 years old and had spent the last 4 years covering alliance politics. She had sharp eyes and a habit of standing very still when something important was about to happen, like an animal that senses weather changing. She was very still now. General Han walked to the speaker's platform at the center of the hall. The room quieted. She did not use notes. She never did. She looked out at the assembled dignitaries and began to speak in standard Galactic, her accent clear and unhurried. She spoke first about the 900 years, about what it had cost every civilization to build something like the Alliance, about the wars that came before it, the border conflicts, the resource battles, the generation ships that had been destroyed by fear and misunderstanding. She spoke about all of it without drama, the way someone speaks about things they have studied deeply and carry with them. Then she changed her tone, just slightly, just enough. She said she wanted to address something that had been discussed in private long enough. She said that the health of the Alliance depended not just on the agreements written in its charter, but on whether those agreements were actually honored. She said that the conquered had a word for what happened when a stronger member quietly consumed the territory of a weaker one. She said that word was violation. She activated the display behind her. Data appeared, survey records, military movement logs, communication intercepts, resource transfer reports, all of it from the outer drift. All of it documenting, system by system and year by year, exactly what the Volkai Empire had done to the Yenar colonies. The room was completely silent. Ambassador Daskaran's expression did not change, but his hands, still clasped behind his back, tightened. General Han walked the room through every piece of evidence. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse with anger. She simply showed, document after document, record after record, the kind of presentation that left no room for reasonable disagreement, only unreasonable denial. When she finished, she stepped back from the display. She looked at the Volkai delegation for a moment. Then she looked at the rest of the room. She said that the alliance had held for 900 years because its members had chosen, again and again, to be better than their worst instincts. She said that choosing to ignore what had happened in the outer drift would be the first step in a very familiar direction. A direction, she said, that every human being in the galaxy had studied closely in their own history books. She picked up her glass from the edge of the platform. She said she believed the alliance could hold for 900 more. She said she believed that because she had met the people in this room and most of them were good. She smiled when she said it, not a political smile, a real one. She raised her glass. The rail slug came through the viewport so fast that no one saw it. There was no sound before impact, just a sharp crack of transparent steel fracturing at the point of entry, and then General Jeonhan stepped back half a step, looked down and stood very still. The glass was still in her hand. It had not spilled. Dihun moved before he thought about moving. He crossed the hall in seconds. Other guards were moving too, drawing weapons, shouting positions into comms. The room broke into chaos, alien dignitaries scattering, chairs falling, someone screaming in a language Dihun didn't know. But Jeon was not falling. She stood for 3 full seconds. Her hand slowly lowered the glass to the platform railing beside her. She looked down at the wound in her chest with the calm, detached expression of someone trying to understand something. Then she looked up, directly at Nari Wu's camera, not by accident, on purpose. Dihun reached her just as her legs gave way. He caught her. She was lighter than he expected. He lowered her to the floor and pressed his hands to the wound, but he already knew. He had done field medical training. He knew what this was. She turned her head toward him. Her voice was very quiet, almost no sound at all. She said, "Don't let them apologize their way out of this." That was all. Her eyes stayed open, they just stopped seeing. Across the hall, Ambassador Daskaran straightened his sash and said in a calm, clear voice that the general's accusations had been inflammatory and politically motivated, and that the Empire took no responsibility for what appeared to be a structural failure in the station's viewport systems. Nari Wu's camera was still running. It had captured everything. The shot, the 3 seconds, the last look, the ambassador's statement. All of it was already moving through the transmission relays, spreading outward at the speed of light, reaching every inhabited system in the galaxy before anyone in that room had time to stop it. In the silence that followed, the only sound Dihun could hear was the alert tone rising from his comm unit. Earth's defense grid had just activated for the first time in 300 years. The galaxy reacted the way it always did when something terrible happened. It talked. Within the first hour after the broadcast, the Telari government released a statement calling the assassination a monstrous violation of Alliance principles and demanding an emergency session of the Conquered Council. The Yenar sent a shorter message, just 2 sentences, expressing grief and asking what the Alliance intended to do. The Pralith Confederacy, a civilization of cautious, Careful beings who had never once in their 400-year alliance membership taken a strong position on anything, released a statement that used the word concerning 6 times and committed to nothing. The Volkai Empire released its own message 2 hours after the broadcast. It expressed deep sorrow at the loss of General Han, called the event a tragedy, and announced the formation of an independent inquiry panel to investigate the circumstances of the viewport failure aboard Orly Station. The panel, the statement noted, would be chaired by a senior Volkai official with extensive experience in structural engineering. Nobody believed a word of it. But belief and action were different things. The galaxy believed in process, in sessions and committees and formal objections filed in the proper format to the proper offices. It had believed in those things for 900 years, and 900 years was a long time to practice a habit. Dewin sat in a medical bay on Orly Station with dried blood on his hands. A medic had offered to clean them. He had said no. He didn't know why. He just wasn't ready yet. He sat with his back against the wall and his knees pulled up, and he stared at the floor and tried to remember every word she had ever said to him. He had served under General Han for 14 months. She had spoken to him personally 4 times. He remembered everyone. He remembered the last one better than all of them. In the emergency security chamber deep beneath the surface of Earth, Chancellor Murray Sohn sat at the head of a long table and listened. She was 59 years old and had been in government for 30 of those years. She had built her entire career on the idea that problems between civilizations could be solved without weapons if the people involved were patient enough and honest enough and willing to sit in a room long enough. She had been called naive for this belief by many people. She had outlasted most of them politically. She did not feel patient right now. Admiral Tiho Lim sat to her left. He was 61 years old and built like someone who had never stopped doing the physical training required of junior officers even after he was far too senior to need it. He had known Jeon Han for 35 years. They had gone through the academy together. He had been at her wedding. He had been in the room when her daughter was born. He had stood at the back of a very cold room on a very cold day when they buried her husband 6 years ago. He sat perfectly still. His hands were flat on the table. His face showed nothing. This was not because he felt nothing. It was because what he felt was too large for his face to contain. Intelligence Chief Ariam Kang stood at the other end of the table. She was 47 years old, lean and precise in the way that people who live entirely inside their own minds often are. She had been telling anyone who would listen for the past 11 years that the Volkai Empire was not committed to the alliance in any real way, and that humanity needed to be prepared for the moment that commitment was tested. She had filed reports. She had requested meetings. She had sent messages that were replied to with polite acknowledgments and no action. She did not say, "I told you so." She had never been interested in being right. She had always been interested in being ready. She placed a single data slate on the table in front of Chancellor Murray and slid it across. Murray picked it up. She read the title of the file. She looked up at Ariam. Ariam said it had been written 30 years ago, the same year humanity signed the Concord Accords. She said it had been updated every 5 years since then. She said every HIDC admiral above a certain clearance level knew it existed. She said General Han had reviewed the last update herself, 8 months ago, and had signed off on it without changing a single line. Murray looked back down at the slate. The file was called Protocol IRONVAL. She began to read. Outside the chamber, in the offices and monitoring stations that surrounded it, people worked in near silence. Communication officers tracked incoming transmissions from alliance members. Analysts processed the Volkai Empire's military movements in the hours since the assassination. Someone brought coffee that nobody drank. In those offices, something strange was being noticed. Human communication traffic across the galaxy was dropping, not because of technical failure. The systems were all working. People were simply going quiet. Fleet commanders were not issuing statements. Politicians were not appearing on broadcasts. The usual flood of human voices reacting to a crisis, arguing, grieving, demanding answers, had slowed to almost nothing. A Volkai intelligence analyst named Torak was monitoring human communication channels from an orbital station above the Empire's sixth-largest world. He had been watching the feeds for 3 hours. He was a careful man who had spent 20 years studying humanity and believed he understood them reasonably well. Emotional, loud in grief, slow to organize, deeply attached to their institutions and processes. He had written his assessment of them in a report 2 years ago that had been well received at the Imperial Intelligence Directorate. He was beginning to wonder if he had made a significant error. He flagged his concern to his superior. His superior passed it up the chain. By the time it reached the Imperial Strategy Office, the assessment attached to it said that humanity's silence was likely a result of cultural shock and institutional paralysis, and that no military response was expected for at minimum 10 years, possibly never. The cultural conditioning of 300 years of peacekeeping was considered too deep to reverse quickly. The Emperor read the assessment at the start of Hour 8. He found it reassuring. He began preparing a formal statement of sympathy that he intended to deliver personally, which he believed would go a long way towards settling the matter. In the emergency security chamber on Earth, Murray finished reading Protocol IRONVIL at the end of Hour 8. She sat quietly for a moment. Then she asked Ariam 3 questions. Ariam answered all 3 of them without hesitation. Then Murray asked Tiho if the fleet was ready. Tiho said it had been ready for 30 years. Murray picked up a pen. It was an old-fashioned physical pen, the kind her father had used. She signed the authorization at the bottom of the Protocol IRONVIL file, dated it, and set it down on the table. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she said, quietly, that she hoped Jion would understand. Tiho said, without moving, that Jion had reviewed and approved this plan 8 months ago. Murray nodded. She did not say anything else. At Hour 9, something happened that no other civilization in the galaxy had ever done, had ever planned to do, or had ever believed was even possible to coordinate. Every human vessel in every sector of the galaxy switched off its transponder at the exact same second. Every communication array on every human ship dropped to minimum emission. Every registered human fleet, patrol unit, resupply convoy, and science vessel went dark simultaneously, as if someone had reached across the entire galaxy and turned off a light. Thousands of ships, hundreds of systems, all of them vanishing from the tracking maps of every monitoring station in known space at precisely the same moment. The Concord Council's Traffic Control Center registered the event as a possible network failure and ran a diagnostic. The diagnostic came back clean. The ships were simply gone. Torak, the Volkai intelligence analyst, stared at his empty screens for a long time. Every human signal he had been tracking gone. Not degraded, not disrupted. Gone. Turned off on purpose all at once without a single comm exchange between them that his systems had caught. He thought about his report, the one about humanity's slow organization and deep pacifist conditioning. He thought about the word paralysis. He thought about what it meant when something that large moved that quietly and that fast. He opened a new message to the Emperor's personal channel. He did not write a report this time. He wrote 1 sentence. He sent it. Then he sat very still in his chair and stared at the dark screens and waited. On the floor of Aurelie Station's medical bay, Dewin finally let the medic clean his hands. He watched the water run red and then pink and then clear. Then he stood up, straightened his uniform, and walked to the communications terminal at the end of the corridor. He requested a connection to Earth Command. The line opened immediately. He asked what his orders were. The voice on the other end told him to report to Bay 7. A ship was waiting. He had been promoted to captain. Effective immediately, and assigned to the lead vessel of the First Strike Fleet. He said he understood. He closed the channel. He walked toward Bay 7. He did not look back at the hall where she had fallen. The first thing Admiral Tiho Lim did when Protocol IRONVIL was authorized was sit alone in his office for 4 minutes. He did not plan. He did not review files. He just sat. He was thinking about a conversation he and Jiyeon had many years ago, when they were both still young enough to think war was something that happened to other people in other centuries. She had asked him once what he thought humanity's real inheritance was. He had said something about resilience. She had shaken her head and said no. She said humanity's real inheritance was memory, that every other spacefaring species had gone through their violent period, evolved past it, and then slowly forgotten what it felt like. That they had the luxury of distance from their worst history, that humans did not. That humans carried it everywhere they went, in their stories and their languages, and the way their hands went to their sides when they felt threatened. She said that was not something to be ashamed of. She said it was something to be careful with. He had thought about that conversation many times over the years. He thought about it now for 4 minutes. Then he stood up, walked to his command center, and went to work. What Protocol IRONVIL revealed to the rest of the galaxy came in stages, like light appearing through an opening door. The first thing other civilizations noticed, in the hours after the human fleet went dark, was the absence of human resupply ships at the standard trade routes. Those ships had gone dark along with everything else, but their disappearance from commercial lanes caused immediate disruption. Fuel depots that relied on human logistics reported shortages. A Pralith cargo convoy found its scheduled rendezvous point empty. Small things, noticeable things. Then the Concord Council's Deep Space Monitoring Array detected something that its operators initially believed was a calibration error. Across 40 different star systems, in asteroid belts, behind large moons, tucked inside the magnetic shadows of gas giants, large metallic structures were powering up. Structures that had not been on any registered map. Structures that had been built so slowly, over such a long period of time, using such carefully designed low-emission methods, that no scan had ever flagged them as artificial. 14,000 ships came out of hiding. Not old ships, not reserve vessels kept barely functional in case of emergency. New ships, well-maintained, fully armed, crewed, and ready. Vanguard-class strike cruisers, a class no other civilization had ever seen documented because the documentation had never been shared. Each one was built for speed and for the complete destruction of a single large target. They moved out of their hidden berths in long, quiet lines, forming up in the dark between stars. Behind them came the Bastion array platforms, 300 of them. Each one was a self-contained fortress, large enough to hold an entire star lane on its own. They had been assembled piece by piece over decades, disguised in shipping manifests as deep space research stations and navigational buoys. The other Alliance species received a data package from Earth's Intelligence Division at the same moment Tiho began moving his fleet. The package contained a complete disclosure of everything, every hidden ship, every concealed platform, every classified weapons system, every soldier registered in Alliance space under a civilian occupation. All of it laid out clearly, with construction dates and capability specifications and strategic placement maps. There was a short message attached. It said that humanity had never hidden these things from its friends. It said they had been hidden for their enemies. It said the other Alliance species had never been in any danger, and that humanity was sorry it had come to the point where disclosure was necessary. It said to please stay clear of Volkai space. The reactions were immediate and varied. The Telari ambassador contacted Murray within minutes and asked, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound calm, how many ships humanity actually had. Murray told her. The ambassador was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she see. Murray said she understood if the Telari needed time to process. The ambassador said they would need more than time. The Pralith government sent 17 separate diplomatic messages in the span of 2 hours, each one more alarmed than the last, all of them asking humanity to reconsider, to pursue dialogue, to allow the council process to work. Tiho's office responded to each one with the same message. It said the council process was welcome to address every conflict in the galaxy, except the one involving the civilization that had shot their general on a live broadcast, and described it as a structural defect. It said to please stand clear of Volkai space. The Yenar sent no messages. They sent a short audio file. It was the sound of their traditional morning bells, the same bells they rang when their own territory had been taken from them, the same bells the galaxy had politely ignored. It played for 40 seconds and then ended. No words, none were needed. Deep inside the Volkai Empire's intelligence network, the full scope of what was happening became clear to their analysts about 4 hours after the disclosure package arrived. Torak, still sitting at his monitoring station, read the specifications of the Vanguard-class strike cruisers, and then slowly read them again. He pulled up the Bastion array placement maps and cross-referenced them with Volkai's known defensive positions. He ran 3 separate threat assessment calculations. All 3 came back with the same result. He filed his final intelligence report of the day. It was 1 paragraph. It said that the Empire had made a severe miscalculation. It said that humanity's 300 years of peacekeeping activity had not been the behavior of a civilization that had grown soft. It said it had been the behavior of a civilization that was very good at waiting. He recommended immediate contact with Earth for unconditional negotiations. The report was read by the Emperor. The Emperor did not take the recommendation. The Emperor instead ordered his 1st and 3rd fleets to the border, and declared that any incursion into Volkai sovereign space would be met with full military response. He released a public statement saying the Empire would not be intimidated by a young civilization throwing a childish display of weapons. He called humanity's actions a betrayal of Alliance values. His High Council read the statement and said nothing. They had read Torak's report too, but the Emperor was still the Emperor, and the Emperor had spoken. Tiho received the border deployment report at his command station. He read it, set it aside, and continued his work. The border was exactly where he expected Volkai to draw their line. He had planned for it. There was one more element of protocol IRONVEIL that no other civilization in the galaxy had been told about. Not because it was being hidden from allies, but because it had not been necessary to disclose until now. It was called Project Imberville. Ariam had named it. Tiho had approved the construction 30 years ago. Gion had read the file once. At the same time she reviewed everything else, and had said only that she hoped it never had to be used. She had signed the continuation order anyway. Project Imberville was a network of deep space relay emitters, placed in precise orbital positions around 12 Volkai systems over the course of 20 years, disguised as standard navigational transponders. When activated together, they could generate a coordinated electromagnetic suppression field around a target star, dampening its natural output across specific frequency bands. The effect lasted 6 hours. During those 6 hours, any fleet relying on standard navigation systems within 10 AU of that star would be completely blind. It had never been tested on a live star. Tiho activated it for the first time as his fleet crossed the Volkai border. He chose Korath Prime, the most heavily fortified Volkai system, the one they were most proud of, the one they would least expect anyone to touch. He activated Imberville at 300 standard and watched the suppression field spread across the system's monitoring grid. For 6 hours, the Korath Prime garrison could not see past their own hulls. Tiho did not fire a single weapon during those 6 hours. He broadcast one message into the blinded system, on repeat, every 30 minutes. It said, "We could have destroyed you in those 6 hours. We chose not to. This is your demonstration. There will not be another one. At hour 5, the Korath Prime Garrison Commander made contact requesting terms of surrender. At hour 6, the garrison stood down. Not a single shot had been fired. Not a single human soldier had died. The most fortified system in the Volkai Empire had been taken with a light switch and a message. Diwen's fleet had crossed the border on the eastern approach at the same time. His first engagement was smaller, a patrol fleet of 30 Volkai vessels guarding a transit corridor near the outer drift. He sat in the command chair of his ship and watched the tactical display, and thought about 30 Volkai ships standing between him and the territory they had stolen from the Yenar. He thought about Jiun on the floor of that hall, about the glass that never spilled, about 3 seconds. He gave the engagement order in a flat voice. The battle lasted 11 minutes. No Volkai vessels survived it. Diwen's fleet had no casualties. When it was over, he sat in the quiet of the command deck and looked at the display. Then he opened a channel to the Yenar colony station at the edge of the outer drift and told them that their transit corridor was clear. The response from the station was a long silence, and then a voice, small and careful, that said thank you in standard Galactic. He closed the channel. He looked at the stars on the main screen. Somewhere out there, 14,000 ships were moving through the dark. 300 fortress platforms were locking into position across every major approach into Volkai space. The most carefully hidden military force in galactic history was no longer hidden. The galaxy was learning something about humanity that humanity had always known about itself. They were not peacekeepers because they didn't know how to fight. They were peacekeepers because they knew exactly how, and they had spent 900 years hoping they would never have to prove it. Nobody who understood war thought it would be easy. The ones who thought it would be easy were the ones who had never seen it. Diwen had never seen real war. Neither had most of the soldiers under his command. They had trained for it. They had read about it. They had studied every major military conflict in human history going back thousands of years, because the HIDC Academy required it, and because Jiun Han had personally written 3 of the required textbooks. But knowing about war and being inside it were 2 very different experiences, and the first weeks taught Diwen the distance between them in ways that no textbook could. The Volkai were not a weak enemy. This needed to be understood clearly, because it would have been easy, after the Korath Prime demonstration, to believe that the war would be short and clean and simple. It was not. The Volkai Empire had been a military civilization for over 1,000 years. Their soldiers were disciplined and experienced. Their fleet commanders were intelligent and adaptable. Their weapons technology was in many areas equal to humanity's, and in a few areas better. The first major fleet engagement happened 6 days after the border crossing, in the wide belt of debris and dark matter between Volkai's 3rd and 4th star systems. Tiho called it the Rel Corridor. He brought his 2nd and 4th fleets into the approach at what he calculated would be the Volkai's most logical defensive point. He was right about the location. He was less right about the size of the force waiting there. The Volkai's 6th fleet had been reinforced with ships from 2 reserve commands. When Tiho's forces came through the corridor, they were facing numbers roughly equal to their own. The battle lasted not hours but days. 3 days of constant engagement, ships moving and maneuvering and firing in the dark between stars. Tiho lost over 200 vessels in those 3 days. Hundreds of crew members died. Not numbers in a report. People who had families and histories and rooms on Earth or on colony stations that would now stay empty. Tiho did not allow himself to look at the casualty lists during active operations. He looked at them every evening before he slept so that he would not forget what each decision cost. It had been Jiun's habit. He had learned it from her. On the 3rd day of the Rel Corridor engagement, Diwen's Eastern Fleet was redirected into the battle as reinforcement. He arrived at the edge of the engagement zone and looked at his tactical display and saw the pattern of the Volkai formation, a dense interlocking arrangement designed to hold their position and force a war of attrition, trading ships until the smaller force ran out first. He sat in his command chair and stared at the display for a long time. He was thinking about something he had read at the academy, not a space battle, something much older, a sea battle from Earth's ancient history, fought on water with wooden ships, where an outnumbered commander had broken an enemy line by attacking at an unexpected angle, splitting the formation and turning its strength into confusion. He explained the idea to his senior officers. They looked at him. One of them said they were not wooden ships on water. He said the principle was the same. He gave the order. The angle of approach he chose was one the Volkai formation was not designed to cover. When Diwen's fleet hit the edge of the interlocking formation at full speed and began pushing through the gap, the formation began to fracture. Ships that had been covering each other suddenly had new threats from new directions and had to choose. When they chose, they created new gaps. Within 11 hours, the Volkai Sixth Fleet's formation had collapsed and the engagement was over. The Volkai Sixth Fleet retreated. Tiho did not chase them. He consolidated his position and moved forward. The war went on. There were victories and there were losses, and in this the war was honest. Humanity did not steamroll through the Volkai Empire the way the galaxy might have expected after Korath Prime. They fought hard and they bled and they pushed forward, and the Volkai fought back with everything they had because they were fighting for their own territory now, and that changed something in soldiers regardless of species. The battles had names. The burning of Drell Station, where a Volkai counterattack destroyed a human supply line and set back the eastern advance by 3 weeks. The quiet push at Yenar's Edge, where humanity's forces quietly and methodically cleared every Volkai military post from the stolen Outer Drift colonies, one by one, returning them to Yenar control without ceremony. The long siege of Volkai Prime's outer ring, which lasted 40 days and tested every ship and every commander and every soldier in ways that training never had. And then there was the day Colonel Hyunwoo Bei died. Hyunwoo had been one of Jeon's students. Literally, he had been in her advanced tactics course at the academy 20 years ago, and she had personally recommended him for field command. He was 43 years old, with a loud laugh and a habit of drawing small sketches of every planet he'd ever visited in a notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. He had been clearing the last Volkai garrison from the 3rd Yenar colony, the same colony whose transit corridor Diwen had opened in the first week of the war. A Volkai holdout unit, refusing to surrender, had set a perimeter charge. Hyunwoo had gone forward personally to get his soldiers back. He did not make it back himself. Diwen received the report while his fleet was holding position near Volkai's 5th system. He read it twice. He sat with it for a while. He had not known Hyunwoo as well as Jeon had known him, but he had met him twice, and both times the man had given the impression of someone who genuinely loved what he did, not the fighting, but the protecting, the going forward so others didn't have to. Diwen looked out at the stars through the forward viewport of his command deck. He thought about what he had told himself when all of this began, that it was justice, that it was for Jeon, that it was owed. He was no longer sure that was enough, not because it was wrong, but because Jeon herself would not have stopped at that. She would have asked what it was building. She would have wanted to know what came after. She had always been thinking further ahead than the room she was standing in. He pulled up his personal log and started recording a note, which he almost never did. He said that he thought the war was right. He still believed it was right, but he wanted to go on record with himself that it was costing something real, and that the cost needed to mean something, and that meaning something meant not stopping at winning. He saved the log and went back to his tactical display. Meanwhile, the Emperor was losing. Not just battles, systems. The outer territories fell first, then the mid-systems, then the fortified interior lines one by one. Each time a system fell, the emperor offered something: the assassin's identity, territorial concessions in the outer drift, financial reparations, a seat at a new negotiating table. Each time, Murray's office replied with the same message: unconditional surrender of imperial military command, full tribunal for the assassination order, permanent disbandment of the imperial command structure. Nothing less. 3 times the emperor refused. Each refusal was noted and filed, and Tiho's fleets moved forward one more step. The Volkai High Council watched all of this from their chamber. They were not fools. They understood what the casualty lists meant. They understood what it meant when the emperor's advisors began quietly leaving the palace on undisclosed personal business. They understood what it meant when the 3 greatest military commanders in the empire each independently submitted conditional retirement notices on the same day. It meant the people who knew how war worked had finished their calculations. At the end of the 41st day of the long siege, the Volkai High Council convened without the emperor for the first time in the empire's history. The meeting lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 2 senior council members arrived at the emperor's chamber with a legal document signed by all 9 council members. It removed the emperor from command authority under emergency governance provisions that had not been invoked in 700 years. The emperor read the document carefully, then he set it on his desk. He did not fight it. He was an arrogant man and a proud man and a man who had made a catastrophic error, but he was not a stupid one. He had lost. He understood what that meant. He signed the transfer of authority and went to his private chambers and did not come out again for many days. The new council chair opened a direct channel to Earth at 600 Standard. Chancellor Murray was already awake. She had not been sleeping well for 41 days. She took the call at her desk with a cup of tea that had gone cold, in a room that smelled like recycled air and old documents, and she listened to the new council chair say that Volkai was ready to discuss terms. She said she was glad to hear it. She did not smile when she said it. There was nothing to smile about yet. There was only the hope, small and fragile and very tired, that the next step would build into something worth all of this. She set down her cold tea and began to talk. Peace was harder than war. Diwen had not expected that. He had expected the opposite, that once the fighting stopped, things would get lighter, that the tension would leave his chest and the weight would lift from his shoulders and he would feel something like relief. Instead, the first weeks after the ceasefire were strange and heavy in a way he had no good word for. The guns were quiet, but the silence they left behind was not comfortable. It was full of things that still needed answering. The negotiations took 4 months. They were held not on Orly Station, nobody wanted to go back there yet, but on a neutral platform above the Telari homeworld, in a long series of slow, careful sessions that Ariam attended as humanity's lead strategic advisor and Murray attended as chancellor. Tiho's fleet held position at the edge of Volkai space throughout all 4 months, engines warm, weapons cold. This was not a threat, Murray told the council. It was a fact. She said facts were useful in negotiations. The Volkai High Council sent its best diplomats. They were intelligent and serious people who had spent the past 41 days watching everything their emperor built come apart and had drawn their own conclusions from the experience. They argued on several points. They pushed back on the tribunal requirements. They asked for adjustments to the military disbandment terms. Ariam answered every argument with the same patience and the same immovable clarity. She knew every document, every precedent, every clause. She had been preparing for this conversation, in one form or another, for 11 years. The final agreement was signed on a Thursday morning, in a room with no windows, surrounded by documents and cold drinks, and the particular exhaustion that comes from doing very hard work for a very long time. The agreement was called the Gion Accords. Humanity had named it. No other species objected. The Volkai High Council chair, when told the name, sat quietly for a moment and then nodded once and signed. The Accords restructured the conquered Peace Alliance from the ground up. The old alliance had been a council of equals with no real power to enforce its own agreements, a place where civilizations could talk, but where no one could make anyone do anything. The failure of 900 years had been right there in the design. Everyone had always known it. Nobody had wanted to be the one to change it, because changing it meant someone had to hold authority, and everyone had preferred to pretend authority wasn't necessary. The new alliance had a joint enforcement tribunal with real power, the authority to investigate violations, convene a unified response fleet, and act on decisions without requiring unanimous agreement from all members. Every civilization signed. The Pralith sent 17 separate messages of support. The Yenar quietly returned to administering their own colonies for the first time in 11 years. The permanent command seat on the new joint tribunal went to humanity, by unanimous vote from every other species in the alliance. No human representative had asked for it. The vote came before anyone from Earth had suggested the idea. It was simply what the other civilizations agreed on, without discussion, as the obvious and necessary result of what they had all just seen. Tiho took the seat. He was 62 years old by then, and his hair had gone fully white during the war, and he moved more slowly than he used to. He showed up on the first day of the tribunal's operation in his dress uniform with 30 years of service ribbons on his chest, sat down in the permanent command chair, and picked up the briefing files for the first 3 active disputes already waiting for attention. He worked through them methodically that afternoon and issued his first 3 recommendations before the end of the day. Nobody asked when he was planning to retire. They already knew the answer. Ariam went back to intelligence work, but now she worked openly inside the tribunal's new verification division, with full authority and a staff of 200 people from 6 different species. She built the division carefully, the way she built everything, precisely, quietly, with attention to small details and long timelines. She wrote a new contingency file within the first month. She called it something different from IRONVIL because this one was not about weapons. It was about early detection, about watching for the first small signs of the pattern she had seen in the Volcae Empire before anyone else had been willing to look. She was not building it because she expected another war. She was building it because she understood that peace was not a destination. It was a practice. It required maintenance and attention, and the willingness to say uncomfortable things clearly before they became unavoidable ones. She thought Gion would have agreed. She was certain of it, actually. Murray resigned as Chancellor 3 days after signing the Accords. She had told Tiho before the war that she had no intention of staying in office 1 day longer than the crisis required, and she had kept her word. Her resignation address was brief. She said that the 2 hardest things she had ever signed were the war authorization and the peace agreement, and that both of them together had cost more than she had known a signature could cost. She said she hoped the people who came after her would never have to learn that particular lesson the same way she had. She retired to a small house by the water on Earth's southern coast and spent a considerable amount of time sitting on the back step looking at the ocean. She read books. She grew some vegetables badly. She answered letters from people who wanted to tell her what they thought about what she had done, which came in large volumes from every direction, and she read all of them and replied to none of them. She was not hiding, she was resting. She had earned it. Nari Wu's broadcast, the full, uncut version, from the sound of the rail slug through Gion's 3 seconds to the ambassador's statement, was submitted to the new Alliance Charter Archive by the Earth Broadcasting Collective 3 weeks after the Accords were signed. The archive accepted it and filed it under a new category they created specifically for it. They called the category Primary Historical Documents. It became the most requested file in the archive's history within the first year. Every species accessed it. Scholars wrote about it. Diplomats cited it in arguments. Young soldiers in training programs were shown it in orientation sessions, not as a record of a tragedy, as a document about cause and consequence, about what happened when a civilization that had extended 300 years of good faith was answered with a rail slug and a lie. It was shown so many times in so many places to so many different kinds of people that eventually the moment became something larger than itself. It became a word, in several alien languages, for the specific idea of a mistake that cannot be undone and should not be forgotten. Dewin arrived at Orly Station on a quiet morning about 7 months after the war ended. The station had been repaired and rebuilt and renamed. The new name was carved in 7 languages above the main entrance to the central hall. In standard Galactic it read, "The Han Geon Memorial Concord Platform." He stood outside the hall for a while before going in. The hallway was different now, the floor was new, the walls were clean, and someone had put real plants along both sides, not just for a summit but permanently, as a design choice. They were from 7 different worlds, arranged in pairs, growing next to each other in long clay pots. Inside the hall, alien delegations from all 7 Alliance species were assembling for the first official session of the new Joint Tribunal. Tiho was already at the front, standing near the main table with several other senior figures. Ariam was in the back row with her staff. Nari was there too, because she was always there when something important was happening. Dewin walked to the center of the hall. He stood at the same platform where Geon had stood. He looked out at the assembled room. It was a different room from the one she had spoken in. More people, more species, something more serious in the air but also something more honest. He did not have prepared remarks. He had brought only one thing, a small printed copy of the speech Geon had been giving when she was shot, the speech she never finished. He read it from the beginning, her words, not his. He read all of it in a clear and steady voice, including the ending she had reached and the sentences she had not. He finished the last paragraph, the one about 900 more years, about the people in the room being good, and then he set the paper down on the platform and stood quietly for a moment. Nobody spoke. The hall was completely still. Then Tiho from the front of the room began to applaud, slowly at first, then more fully. The room followed, all 7 species, all of them together in a rebuilt hall on a station between stars under a name carved in 7 languages. It lasted a long time. Outside, through the clear ceiling, the stars continued their slow movement, indifferent and beautiful. 7 civilizations lived among them now, connected by an agreement that finally had teeth, anchored at its center by the smallest of them, the youngest, the most recently arrived, the ones who had come last to the galaxy and had spent 300 years showing everyone what patience looked like. And what the end of patience looked like. They had not wanted to rule. They had not wanted an empire or a throne or a permanent seat at any table. They had wanted what Geon had raised her glass toward on the last evening of her life, 900 more years of something worth protecting. Since they could not have her back, they built it for her instead. The galaxy turned, the stars held their places. And in the new hall, with new names on the walls and new plants growing in clay pots along the floor, the work of keeping it all together began again.